It's time for the Ask a Librarian question of the week. This week's question is, how can I get my orchid to rebloom? Do they bloom just once a year? How an orchid blooms is dependent on the type of orchid. There are numerous natural and artificial hybrids of orchids, about 28,000 current species. There is a great diversity of plants within the orchid family, which means some will bloom multiple times a year, while others will bloom annually. For example, Vanda orchids will bloom 2 to 3 times a year, with a bloom cycle lasting up to 6 weeks. In contrast, Cymbidium orchids bloom just once a year. You should first determine the variety of orchid that you own, in order to determine its expected bloom cycle. In order to get your orchid to rebloom, there are a number of different factors to consider. The most common reason an orchid fails to bloom is that it is receiving inadequate light. House your orchid in bright conditions, but not in direct sunlight, as this might damage the plant. Orchids also require a temperature differential to trigger blooming. Expose your orchids to nighttime temperatures 10 degrees cooler than the daytime temperatures for 2 weeks at the start of the orchid's blooming season. Also consider the nutrition the orchid is receiving from fertilizer. Use a urea-free fertilizer, which will provide appropriate nitrogen levels for the plant. Also pay attention to the plant's roots to see if it requires repotting, and avoid overwatering or underwatering the orchid. For more information on orchid care, check out our great selection of plant care books at www.windsorpubliclibrary.com. Do you have a question you want our librarians to answer? Send your question to askalibrarian@windsorpubliclibrary.com.